Hi, and welcome to this tutorial on Linocut printmaking. In this tutorial we're going to have a look at how to create a Linocut print of a mushroom just like the one here. Let's get started. First, I thought it might be useful to have a look through the various materials that you're going to need. First, you're going to need your sketch. It can be of a mushroom like mine or anything that you choose. Next, you're going to need a sheet of tracing paper and a pencil. And of course your Linocut block. I use the traditional battleship grey Hessian backed lino, but there's lots of different types to choose from. Some sanding paper or a sanding block. Acrylic paint to stain the lino and a brush to apply it with. A fine lined permanent marker. A pair of scissors. Your Linocut tools. I use the File range, which are Swiss made. They're quite expensive, but they are really nice tools, and it is possible to resharpen them, so they should last for years. Your ink. I choose to use oil-based ink. I'm using black for this print, and I'm using Caligo Safe Wash ink, which although oil-based is still easy to clean up. And also I'm going to add a little bit of a wax dryer to help the prints dry faster. Your roller, also known as a brayer, to apply the ink. Paper. For this example I'm going to use Hosho paper, but there's lots of different papers you can choose from. A wooden spoon, and optionally a glass baron. And finally, for cleaning up at the end, I use a Zest-It printmaker's cleaner and some kitchen towel. In this example, I'm using the traditional grey Hessian backed lino. It's important that your lino is fresh, otherwise it can get hard. First step is to sand it down, either with some rough sanding paper or a sanding block as I've got here. This will help to ensure a better transfer of the ink when it comes to printing. As you can see, I'm sanding it in a couple of directions. And if you hold it up to the light, you should see that it now has a matte appearance as opposed to any sheen. Once finished, just wipe away the dust with a damp cloth. Now it's time to stain the lino. It doesn't matter what colour of paint you use. I'm just using red because it's dark enough to see where I've cut, but not so dark that I can't see my drawing later on. I'm just going to use a little bit of acrylic and water it down. We really just want to stain the block rather than paint on it too heavily. Trying to paint it so it's nice and smooth and leave it like that to dry. You can either use one coat as I've applied here or add a second coat. I prefer to add 2 coats just to make it a little darker. And leave it to dry again. Next, you want to go to your prepared sketch and place a sheet of tracing paper over it. To make sure it doesn't move, it's best to tape it in place with some masking tape. You then want to trace over this drawing. Use a pencil such as an HB, a B or a 2B that will be soft enough to easily transfer to the lino later on. You want to trace all of the key lines of the drawing. Once this is complete, get your piece of lino and place the tracing paper face down so that the side with the pencil is touching the lino. Tape it in place again to make sure that it doesn't move. And then, using a harder pencil, such as an H or a 2H, draw on the back of the lines to transfer the pencil to the lino block underneath. This will create a mirror image of your drawing on the lino block, which means that when it's printed, it will be the right way around again. And although it's faint, here you can just about see the transferred drawing on the lino. To make the drawing easier to see, I recommend going over it with a fine line permanent marker pen. As before, trace over all of the key lines of the drawing. There, that's much easier to see now. An optional step before you start carving is to make a digital copy of the illustration. I use Procreate for this. Starting with a photograph of the lino block, I then fill the page in black and slowly draw out the areas which I would want to carve away as white. This helps me work out which areas I want to carve before I do so on the lino block. Obviously with the digital copy you can try out different things, and if anything goes wrong you can just undo it. You don't have quite that same luxury with the lino, unfortunately. With my digital drawing as a reference, I'm now ready to start carving. To begin with, I'm going to use a U-shaped 11/1 file tool. And as you can see, I start just by carving around the outline of the illustration. This tool is quite small, so it allows me to cut around all the fine details of the shape. Once I've gone round the edge entirely with that particular tool, I'm going to do the same again but with a slightly larger tool. This time I'm using a U-shape 11/2. And I repeat the process, just making the outline a little wider. We're aiming to eventually cut away all of the background to just leave the mushroom remaining. Now that I've got a thicker outline, I'm not so worried about damaging the edge of the mushroom if I go in with a larger tool. So this time I'm going to use this large U-shape 8/7 tool to cut around the rest of the outside of the mushroom. I could carve away all of the background with this tool, but a quicker way is to cut away a thick recess around the mushroom itself that I can then cut away with a pair of scissors. There we go, that's ready for cutting. Now that I've got a suitably wide recess around the mushroom, I can come in with a large pair of scissors and just cut through the lino. This is useful in that it both saves time in terms of carving away the background, but also means that there won't be any what we call chatter in the background to make noise on the back of the print. Sometimes this can be a desirable effect, but for this particular print I want to keep the background nice and clean. Once I've cut out the mushroom, I can go in a little bit closer and get rid of as much of the background as I feel is safe to do so. And there we go, the mushroom is now cut out. I'm now going to use another U-shaped tool, this one a little smaller than the last. It's an 8/3. I'm just using this tool to cut away any ridges that are still remaining on the background. So I'm just cutting all of these away to make it as smooth and flat as possible. There we go, that looks pretty neat now. I think we're ready to start the details. To begin the details, I'm going to start with two quite fine U-shaped tools. The first is an 11/1 and the second an 11/05, which is just a little smaller. Using these two tools, I'm going to start cutting out the details, starting with the spots on the mushroom. As you can see, I'm not cutting them out entirely. I want to leave a little bit of texture and detail within them to give a bit more interest to the print. But this kind of thing is totally down to personal preference. It's always best to cut out less than you might need in the first instance, because you can always cut away more, but it's pretty much impossible to replace anything once you've cut it away. Now I'm going to add some lines to indicate that there's a highlight on this bottom ridge of the mushroom, and making a start on the stalk. The top of the mushroom is going to be darker and the stalk's going to be much lighter. I'm just coming back up to add some details around the gills of the mushroom. Back onto the stalk, I'm adding some of the little details, and then cutting away quite a bit on the stalk because it's a lot paler than the top of the mushroom. At the bottom, I find I don't have quite enough guidelines, so using my digital illustration that I created earlier, I'm just going to add a few more of these now. And then carving in some more of the detail at the bottom of the mushroom. And here at the very base I need some more guidelines, but this time white on black, so I'm using this white pencil to draw these on before I carve. And that's the lino block finished and ready for printing. There are lots of different papers you can use, but I'm going to start out with this Hosho paper. As you can see, it's too big, about half a sheet will be just right. So with that cut in half, I'm now going to make a template so that I can get the mushroom print in the right position on the paper each time. I've got a bit of scrap paper behind, and I'm just going to trace around the edge of my printing paper. And then within this, I'll place my lino block in the position that I want and draw around that too. And now to prepare the ink. You'll notice that over my table I've got a large sheet of Perspex, so I can apply the ink straight onto the tabletop. I'm using the Caligo Safe Wash black ink and adding some of the wax dryer. Give that a good mix. Next, to roll out the ink. You don't want to have it too thick, otherwise it will sink into all the fine details on your lino block. Note the sound that the ink makes when it's just right. It's better to build up several thin layers than go on too thick too fast. Placing my mushroom in the outline that I've drawn, I can then place over the paper following the guidelines. Note that this paper, like many, has a smoother side and a rougher side. It's the smoother side that you want to place face down in contact with the ink. And I can use a combination of my glass baron and wooden spoon to transfer the print to the paper. It's worth having a little sneak peek to see how well it's transferred. That's still just a bit too patchy. So holding it down on one end, I can just add a little bit more ink to the block. Here I'm weighting down the paper with my glass baron so that I can lift it up without it moving to add a bit more ink to the stalk. And one last go over with the glass baron. And I think that looks good now. And here's the final print. It's worth experimenting with different papers. This one is Thai mulberry paper, which comes in a variety of colours. This one is called Natural, and as you can see has got plant fibres within it. It's a very thin paper and perfect for hand printing. Inking up again. Placing over the paper. And rubbing with the baron and spoon. With this particular paper you can tend to see through it to some extent, which gives you a good idea as to how well the ink is transferring. Have a sneak peek and rub down a few more areas. And that looks good. And that's printed quite nicely. Unfortunately, at the end we have to clean up. But the Caligo Safe Wash inks combined with something like Zest-It Printmaker's Cleaner means it doesn't take too long. First I'm going to put some of the Printmaker's Cleaner onto a kitchen towel and clean up my roller. And then my ink. And finally my lino block. Once I've done that with the Zest-It, I'm going to use some wet wipes, or you could use a damp cloth to do a final stage of cleaning, just to get all the ink off. Finally, here's the block, a little bit stained after printing, and 3 versions of the print on different papers. This one is a Bhutanese Risho paper. It's quite a bit thicker than the others, but I did still manage to hand print it. This is the Thai mulberry paper, probably the easiest of the 3 papers to hand print onto. And this is the Hosho. They all look quite different, but I love them all. I hope you found this tutorial helpful and that it gives you the confidence to have a go yourself.